Welcome everybody to another edition of the Brody File. We're glad you're with us. We begin this week with the plight of the Syrian refugees. How many should America let in, and who are they exactly? Should we just let in the Christian refugees, not the Muslim ones? So many questions, and the answers are not so simple. You know, one man who is weighing in on all of this is our first guest, Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia. He is not one of those off-the-chart liberal Democrats. He's actually moderate. Some would call him a sensible Democrat. He visited our Brody File studios recently to talk about the plight of the refugees, also the vetting process, and how Christianity figures into the mix. Senator Tim Kaine here on the Brody File. Senator, good to see you, sir.
David, yeah, great to be with you, man. Thanks.
Look, we have quite a few topics, but let's start with Syria. Tell me a little bit. There's a conflict in the Christian community, quite frankly, all over America.
Yeah, all over
what
America.
to do with these Syrian refugees? What's your take, maybe more specifically from a Christian perspective on all of this?
Yeah, well, it is a hard choice, and American security has to come first. But we also have to be very careful that we don't betray our own values. There is a bill that passed the House that's Securing America Against Foreign Enemies is the title of the bill. These refugees are not our enemies. ISIL's our enemy, and Congress won't act to declare war against ISIL. But within a very short time, you know, a bill was passed in the House kind of labeling these refugees as our enemies. These are folks who are fleeing the atrocities of Bashar al-Assad's barrel bombs. They're fleeing, you know, persecution of Christians and religious minorities, forcing women into sexual slavery and other kinds of humanitarian atrocities and beheadings by ISIL. This is the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. And the U.S. is a nation that has traditionally been a place of liberty, a statue of liberty and a refuge. And from a Christian standpoint, you know, I even kind of go back to the book of Job in the Old Testament, which is important to Christians, Jews, and Muslims, because it's in the Quran too. Job had a lot of bad things happen to him, but it wasn't because he was sinful, and it wasn't because the world was evil. It was because he was being tested to see if he'd stay true to his principles and his faith, or whether he would abandon his faith. You know, in adversity, he would suddenly stop relying on God. We can't abandon our principles because there's terrorism in the world. And one of our principles has been that we've been that Statue of Liberty nation. So I hope what we'll do, and I think maybe a week or so into this, we're kind of getting to this place where we were really precise about what we need to do to protect American security, but we don't, with a big tar brush, you know, paint all these refugees as if they're enemies. No, these are the victims of the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II.
What about the screening process? How concerned are you about a certain process in place that will make sure that, you know, look, we're not worried, as Marco Rubio said the other day, about the 5-year-old or the 90-year-old widow, but what can be done in that regard? So
two kinds of screening I think it's really important for us to talk about. Refugees and then just people who come in on visas. So let's talk about both. On the refugee side, the screening process is really intense. That doesn't mean we can't make it better, but it's really intense. So here's the numbers. 4 million people have left Syria and registered as refugees with the UN, and then many are trying to come to other countries. The UN already knows which countries will take refugees under what circumstances, so they take about a year to kind of pre-clear somebody. They've recommended of the 4 million, 20,000 to come to the United States. We have analyzed these 20,000 and we've allowed 2,000 in. There's some who are still in process. The normal time that it takes to analyze one of these refugees before we give them a refugee status is 18 months. So it takes a year for the UN to recommend them and then 18 months for us to do the vetting. And there's special vets that have to be done of folks who come from Syria and Iraq already, because sometimes our access to records there aren't so good. So it takes a very long time. So we can make it, you know, stricter still a little bit, but it is already a very strict process. I'll tell you what worries me more, and many of my colleagues more. We have a visa waiver program with 38 nations where if you visit from one of these 38 nations, you don't need to get a visa. You can just buy your ticket and carry your passport and come on in. These 38 nations include nations like France and Belgium and other nations where there have been terrorist attacks, where some of the terrorist attackers are from those countries. So we can analyze to see whether the refugee process can be stricter, but I think it's pretty darn strict. I think the visa waiver program, student visas, there's other kinds of visas that are more likely to be areas where we can find bipartisan improvement.
Speaking about bipartisan improvement, you know, I know Ted Cruz either has a bill, it's out there somewhere along the lines that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you know, let's look at the Christian refugees and bring them in Let's not bring in the Muslim right?
Yeah.
When you hear talk like that, what's your reaction, and how do you deal with that?
Well, it's again, it's like back to the Job thing. When there's a tough time, you're being tested to your fidelity to your principles, and we've always had this wonderful principle, and I'm really partial to it, maybe because it kind of bases in Virginia. When Jefferson wrote the Statute of Religious Freedom into the Virginia law, and then that became the basis of the First Amendment, the basic idea was we will be a country where you will neither be preferred nor punished because of how you worship or how you don't worship. There will be no official position, you won't be preferred or punished. And in an odd way, David, that has led us to be this wonderful religious nation. The First Amendment was based on Jefferson's work. Madison was charged with drafting a Bill of Rights. He didn't originally think there should be a Bill of Rights, but in his home county, Orange County, Virginia, he saw Baptist ministers being persecuted by the Church of England. And he said, you know what, we need a Bill of Rights to provide religious protection. And it wasn't just for Christians, it was for all people, regardless of belief. And so the notion that there should be a religious test for being allowed to come in as a refugee or for any aspect of American life is wrong. We can be a flourishing, thriving religious and spiritual community with different traditions respecting each other. That's one of the best examples we can give to the world, because in so many countries, people of different faiths can't live in the same neighborhood and get along. We do it here. And that's a powerful witness that we should not easily let go of.
That is Tim Kaine here on the Brody File. All right, coming next, he should have been dead. The story of Fox commentator Bob Beckels and his wild story of redemption. Jennifer Wishon with that after the break. And welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File. You know, you actually know him as the liberal on the 5 broadcast on Fox News. Bob Beckels can sure give conservatives heartburn with some of his opinions on political issues. But you might feel a little bit different after our next story. Jennifer Wishon brings us Beckels' redemption story. It's a look at how he found Jesus and almost died in the process.
Bob, you weren't kidding. You really should be dead.
I really should be. Yeah, I've been shot and stabbed in a couple car wrecks where people died. Everybody died except for me, and God knows how many overdoses of drugs I've taken.
In his new book, I Should Be Dead, Bob Beckels explains how he survived politics, TV, and addiction. He took his last drink and drug on January 19, 2001. The night before George W. Bush's first inauguration. Beckels was mad it was Bush, not Gore, who was heading to the White House.
And I went down to a biker bar in southern Maryland, and I was at the bar trying to pick this woman out. She was very attractive. And I felt something behind me, and I turned around. Her husband was there with a .45 caliber right in my face, and he pulled the trigger. And it didn't go off. He hadn't chambered the bullet. Somebody grabbed him from behind, and it blew a 3-foot hole in the ceiling. So they threw me out in the parking lot, and just before I passed out, I remember saying, God, I really don't believe, but if you do exist, that's the last drink I'll ever have.
He woke up in the VIP room of a Washington psychiatric ward. To add insult to injury, he could hear Bush's inaugural parade while lying in his bed. The story of Beckels' self-destruction to that point is extraordinary. One of only 2 photos in his new book include his father, a brilliant man who was also a drunk.
I came from a dysfunctional family, very dysfunctional, and my father used to find great humor in throwing me down the stairs. And, you know, back then, you went to school and you were all beat up and nobody said anything.
Bob's passion for politics started as a young boy, first in 1960, watching his father support John F. Kennedy, and later with his dad's involvement in the civil rights movement. Ironically, it was the beatings from the hand of his dad that taught him to thrive in Washington.
As a survivor, you learn how to talk fast, cut deals, lie when you have to. Perfect training to be a politician, you know. So when I got out, I did very well in the business, and in Capitol Hill is full of survivors. The problem is if you don't turn and face your demons, it's going to catch up with you.
You arrived in Washington on your birthday, 1972, with very little money, absolutely no prospects. 5 years later, you're sitting in the Oval Office briefing President Carter. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's for a guy that grew up the way I grew up. But then, because I didn't have faith, I couldn't figure it out. I kept waiting every day for the Secret Service to come into my office and say, oh, you fraud, get out.
Throughout his storybook career advising congressional campaigns across the country, Beckels made millions that ended up financing vacation homes for his drug dealers.
I used to wake up and look out my window at the front of my car to be sure there's no blood on it, that I hadn't hit anybody.
He eventually lost his business, his marriage, and his once flush bank account. There at his lowest point, sitting on a rock in the middle of a field in Maryland, Beckels called out to God.
God, I don't know if you exist, and this is probably the worst thing for me to do, to ask you the first time out, if you could help me with some money, but I need money really badly. And this was out a mile back on a dirt road. Next day I went out to the mailbox, and always junk mail, and nobody ever sent me anything. And I opened it up, and there was a letter addressed to me, and there was a check inside for $20,000 from a guy that owed me that for 15 years. So I hurried down to the bank. I said, "Is this any good?" And he said, "Yeah, it's good. It's fine. We'll put it right in." Now, you know, people can say that was just coincidence, but I don't think God's in the business of necessarily doling out $20,000. But I think that, you know, He gives you free will, and including free will is the will to seek faith in Him and through Jesus Christ. And if you do that, you will be rewarded for it. I believe that.
Conservative columnist and friend Cal Thomas helped lead Beckels to Christ, and reading the Bible made him rethink some of his positions.
When I came to faith, I was on pro-choice boards, you know, and I dropped off of those because you couldn't read the Bible and be pro-choice.
But he still considers himself a liberal Democrat.
I still believe that there are, you know, tonight someplace in this city, a child's going to be born to a crack addict mother and someplace tonight in this city in the rich suburbs, a white kid will be born to wealthy parents, and I just don't believe they have an equal shot at life. And unless and until I'm confident that everybody has an equal shot at the American dream, then I'm going to remain a liberal in the sense that I do believe that the government has a responsibility, along with charities and others, to help that child till they're 18 years old.
Now he works with addicts, leading interventions to get people into rehab.
It's important for me because it keeps it green, you know. It reminds me of what it was like.
It's become his ministry.
You know, there's no greater reward, I think, than taking somebody who's terminally ill. Most people get shy away from it, but holding their hands and walking them over to the Jordan and handing them off, you know, to a better place.
Digging up his past was hard, but Beckels says unburdening himself is liberating. Now more than ever, he's reveling in a life that's joyous, happy, and free.
There was a huge hole in my stomach, you know, that I kept filling with drugs and alcohol. And now I fill it with God, and it's a much better way to go, and He won't make you sick, you know.
That is Jennifer Wishon with Bob Beckels here on the Brody File. Great story, by the way. God doesn't care what your political party is. He just wants you to be with Him in heaven for all of eternity. All right, when we come back, Jesus is making an appearance in the public square. We explain when the Brody File rolls on. Well, welcome back, everybody. In case you hadn't noticed, our culture headed down the tube. Sorry about that. It is true. Some good news, though. The Washington Times has started a new venture. It's called Jesus in the Public Square, and it's an online opportunity for believers and seekers that are seeking to understand biblical truth in a midst of a culture deteriorating by the minute. Have a look. The cultural slide in America can be traced back to the 60s when the Supreme Court said no to prayer in public schools. That led to legalized abortion in the 70s, and now the High Court says there's a constitutional right to same-sex marriage.
Somebody's values are going to reign supreme, so our goal is to bring our values to the public square.
David Lane with the American Renewal Project first moved toward that goal by urging pastors to get involved in the political process. His next challenge? Getting Jesus into the public discussion. It came about after a visit to a D.C. bookstore.
You couldn't find a Christian book with a flashlight. And it hit me again. Isn't this awful? A nation founded by people on a religious mission, the Mayflower Compact, for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, in the nation's capital, and you can't find a book or Jesus anywhere. And if the Lord does it, we're going to put Jesus right up in the middle of the table in Washington, D.C. He will defend Himself.
That table opened up at the Washington Times. Lane planted a seed with management, which led to a website feature handled by Scott Lamb.
Jesus in the Public Square at the Washington Times hopes to talk about and dialogue with people to show them that Jesus Christ and his lordship is a universal theme, and they should submit to that.
The fact that this effort takes place on a major outlet's website is significant, and so far it's a hit. In the first 2 months, the site had nearly 200,000 page views, making it one of the top 5 most read communities on the Washington Times site.
We felt like we had a hole in there. We had a hole for faith coverage and faith issues. The intersection of faith and public policy, the intersection of faith and politics is larger and larger every day, and it's more complicated. I think that if you come to the Jesus Public Square and you read something there, you're almost certain to learn something that you didn't get to read somewhere else.
Some of the more popular stories featured biblical economics, and another one with a pro-choice journalist who became pro-life after watching the recent Planned Parenthood videos.
We're not looking to do 500 pieces a day. We're looking to do 4, 5, 6 pieces a day that talks about gospel-driven things that really exalts Jesus Christ and gets people thinking. We hope to have a ripple effect outward so that churches are stronger and that individual families are stronger and that people who are not Christian now come into the family of God.
Ultimately, Lane says that the name Jesus in the Public Square reminds us that all truth is God's truth. And for America to change course, the people need to hear his word in a desperate way. Lane is optimistic.
God is in the business of resurrection. I believe there's going to be a resurrection of America, literally.
A great effort, by the way, that we pray will be around for a long time. All right, coming next, a special Merry Christmas in D.C. annual Sights and Sounds. Back in a moment. And welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File. Well, look, it's Christmas time, and you know what that means. We've got Christmas carols, we've got Christmas trees, Christmas decorating, and a whole lot of Christmas cookies. And we like that last one here at the Brody File. It's also time for the beautiful sights and sounds of Christmas in D.C., and that is where Jennifer Wishon takes us. Here's Jenny.
This time of year, the Christmas story and all the festive American trimmings come to life in our nation's capital. And what better place to begin than America's most recognizable home? Come on inside.
There's probably over 7,000 ornaments in this room.
89 volunteers from across the country do most of the decorating.
People were so committed. I mean, we worked nonstop.
Mary Mazeppi traveled from Illinois. It's her first time visiting the White House.
It's rewarding and unbelievable experience. I'm on the moon and I'm still be on the moon. I cannot believe I'm here.
Near the visitors' entrance, first dogs Bo and Sunny guard their own personal Christmas trees made of tennis balls. As part of the First Lady's Joining Forces initiative, visitors to the White House at Christmas time are usually encouraged to send service members handwritten notes. But this year, they'll get a chance to send a digital message using these iPads. Members of the military and their families get the first peek at the decorations. Perched in the middle of the Blue Room, many of the ornaments on the White House Christmas tree were made to honor them. This year's tree was grown in Pennsylvania. Mrs. Obama helped military kids make Christmas crafts.
The season is about so much more. It's about giving more than we receive, right, guys? It's about serving others. It's about toys, too. But it's about finding ways to lift up our communities every day in every season.
90% of the decorations used this year are recycled from previous years.
Can't even begin to explain the difference between visiting the White House and seeing the decorations, which I've done in uniform, and now to come back and be a part of the decoration. It just sends chills through my spine.
The State Dining Room best captures this year's theme, a timeless tradition. A giant teddy bear sits amid trees adorned with thousands of gumballs and candy canes. But the main attraction in this room is the annual White House Gingerbread House. 150 pounds of dark chocolate cover 250 pounds of gingerbread dough. in the White House Library, there are 2,700 books that tell America's story, and the decorating theme is appropriately, knowledge is power. And finally, down the hall to the East Room, where visitors can see the reason for the season. A special nativity scene made of terracotta and intricately carved wood. This nativity was made in Italy during the 18th century and has been displayed in the East Room during Christmas since the 1960s.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Merry Christmas, everybody!
The star-studded National Christmas Tree lighting featured these talented musicians. On the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, the Capitol Christmas tree was lit by America's new Speaker of the House.
Nothing captures the Christmas spirit more than that overwhelming sense of gratitude. And for those of us who are Christians, He gave us His only Son.
Speaker Ryan says we should treat every day and every person as a gift. One of the joys of Christmas is spending time with family and friends, even watching others enjoy the season.
Even if it's been a while like it has for me, ice skating outside in the winter just feels festive. This skating rink outside the National Art Gallery is open through March.
Even the National Zoo celebrates the season. 500,000 lights are used to transform this treasure into a wild winter wonderland. Playful tigers, lions, and elephants come to life. Visitors can also see real animals if they haven't already turned in. A ride around the carousel and trip down a giant slide completes the night. But it's not just for kids. Some couples say their trip to Zoo Lights is their most romantic night out all year. It's also one of the few times leaders in Washington put aside their political differences to celebrate the season.
That was Christmas time in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Jennifer. A double dose, by the way, of Jenny this week. We like it. All right, back in a moment. Hey, everybody, that's it for this week. We really thank you for watching. Until next time, God bless. Have a great week.